Hello everyone, welcome to the Mysterious Stories channel, where you'll discover the most mysterious, scary, and fascinating stories. Make sure to turn up the volume and get ready for a spine-chilling experience you won't forget. Day 1. The beginning of the journey. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue over the dense jungle as Captain Takashi gave the signal to move out. The team of 12 soldiers, each equipped with full gear, began their trek into the unknown, with the mission to check 5 remote border posts. Spirits were high, but the weight of the dense jungle loomed over them like an unspoken warning. Stay vigilant and stick together, Captain Takashi reminded the group as they disappeared into the foliage. By mid-morning, the team had made good progress. The jungle was alive with the sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, the distant calls of monkeys, and the rustling of leaves. The thick canopy overhead provided some relief from the heat, but the humidity was oppressive. Sergeant Li Wei walked alongside Corporal Ananda, discussing the day's route. "We'll reach the first checkpoint by dusk if we maintain this pace," Li Wei said, consulting his map. "Just make sure everyone stays hydrated and alert." As the afternoon wore on, the jungle grew quieter, the air thick with an eerie silence. Corporal Ananda noticed subtle signs of human activity, discarded wrappers, an old campfire, and footprints that led deeper into the jungle. "Looks like we're not the only ones out here," he murmured to himself. The group paused for a brief rest and lunch, each soldier taking the opportunity to hydrate and check their equipment. Captain Takashi gathered his men, emphasizing the importance of caution as they continued deeper into the wilderness. "We don't know who else might be out here," he warned. "Smugglers, illegal border crossers, or worse. Keep your eyes and ears open." As they neared the first checkpoint, the team came across an old, dilapidated structure, perhaps a remnant of a previous border patrol. The air grew cold, and an unsettling feeling crept over the soldiers. Sergeant Li Wei and Corporal Ananda went to investigate the structure. Inside, they found old documents and personal belongings, indicating that the place had been abandoned in haste. "It feels like they left in a hurry," Ananda observed, holding up a tattered photograph of a family. Suddenly, a distant, mournful wail echoed through the jungle, sending chills down their spines. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, but Captain Takashi remained stoic. "Let's move," he ordered, leading the team away from the eerie structure. By dusk, the team reached their first checkpoint, a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. They set up their tents and prepared a modest dinner. The mood was tense, each soldier lost in their thoughts about the day's journey. As night fell, the jungle seemed to come alive with strange sounds, rustling leaves, distant whispers, and the occasional snap of a twig. Corporal Ananda, on the first watch, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "It's just the jungle playing tricks on you," he told himself, gripping his rifle tightly. Hours passed, and the jungle grew darker, the only light coming from the soldiers' campfire. Corporal Ananda thought he saw a shadow move just beyond the fire's light, but dismissed it as his imagination. Just as he was about to wake Sergeant Li Wei for the next watch, he heard it again, the mournful wail they had encountered earlier. This time, it was closer. Ananda's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the darkness, but he saw nothing. "Stay focused," he whispered to himself, trying to maintain his composure. As the night deepened, the eerie atmosphere grew more oppressive. Sergeant Li Wei took over the watch, patrolling the perimeter of the camp. The whispers seemed to grow louder, almost as if they were coming from right behind him. He spun around, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. "Just my mind playing tricks," Li Wei muttered, though he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The night continued with the soldiers on edge, each one sensing an unseen presence lurking just out of sight. Captain Takashi, although outwardly calm, felt the weight of responsibility for his men and the ominous sense that their mission was just beginning. Day 2. The Unseen Watchers. The first light of dawn began to filter through the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows as the team broke camp. The soldiers were weary from a restless night, their eyes red from lack of sleep. Captain Takashi rallied his men, his voice firm despite the unsettling atmosphere. "Pack up and move out," he ordered. "We need to reach the second checkpoint by dusk." The soldiers moved quickly, the sense of urgency palpable. Corporal Ananda couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as they left the clearing behind. The team continued their trek through the jungle, the terrain becoming more challenging. The dense foliage and rugged landscape made progress slow. Sergeant Li Wei led the way, his keen eye scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. "Keep your eyes peeled," he instructed the team. "The jungle is full of surprises." As they moved deeper into the territory, they encountered signs of recent human activity: broken branches, trampled undergrowth, and the occasional discarded item. "Looks like someone passed through here recently," Li Wei noted. "Stay alert." By early afternoon, the team reached a narrow ravine. They descended carefully, using ropes to navigate the steep slopes. At the bottom, they found an old, weathered sign marking the border. "This must be an old checkpoint," Captain Takashi observed. "We'll set up camp here tonight." As they explored the area, Corporal Ananda noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned quickly, but saw nothing. "Probably just a trick of the light," he muttered to himself, though he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As the sun began to set, the team set up their camp in the ravine. The atmosphere was tense, the shadows growing longer and more ominous. Sergeant Li Wei took first watch, patrolling the perimeter with his rifle at the ready. "Stay close to the fire," he advised the others. "The jungle is unpredictable at night." As darkness fell, the jungle came alive with sounds: the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves, and distant animal calls. The soldiers huddled around the fire, their eyes darting nervously at every sound. The night grew darker, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls of the ravine. Suddenly, they heard it again, the faint whispers that had haunted them the previous night. "Did you hear that?" Corporal Ananda asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The soldiers nodded, their faces pale. The whispers grew louder, almost as if they were coming from all around them. Sergeant Li Wei stood up, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Show yourselves," he demanded, his voice echoing in the ravine. "Show yourselves," he demanded, his voice echoing in the ravine. There was no response, only the eerie silence of the jungle. The whispers faded, leaving the soldiers on edge. As midnight approached, the jungle grew eerily silent. The soldiers took turns on watch, their nerves frayed from the constant tension. Captain Takashi sat by the fire, deep in thought. Suddenly, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the camp. It was a woman, her clothes tattered and her eyes hollow. She pointed towards the jungle, her mouth moving silently. "Who are you?" Takashi asked, but the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He turned to his men, who had also seen the apparition. "We need to stay vigilant," he said. "There's something out there, and it's watching us." Sergeant Li Wei took over the watch, his senses heightened by the day's events. As he patrolled the perimeter, he felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped. He turned to see a group of shadowy figures standing just beyond the fire's light. Their faces were obscured, but their presence was undeniable. Li Wei raised his rifle, but the figures vanished into the darkness. "Stay calm," he told himself, though his heart was pounding. "It's just your mind playing tricks." The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. The soldiers huddled together, the sense of dread growing with each passing hour. Day 3. Shadows of the Past. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the jungle canopy, the soldiers woke up from a fitful sleep. The eerie events of the previous night weighed heavily on their minds. Captain Takashi called the team together for a briefing. "We need to reach the second checkpoint by dusk," he said, his voice firm. "Stay focused and stay together." The team packed up their camp quickly, eager to leave the unsettling ravine behind. Corporal Ananda couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but he kept his thoughts to himself as they began their trek. The jungle seemed denser and more oppressive as the team moved deeper into it. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of the jungle seemed amplified. Sergeant Lee Wei led the way, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. "We're making good progress," he said, consulting his map. "But we need to be cautious. This area is known for illegal activities." As they moved forward, they came across an old, overgrown trail. The path was barely visible, but it seemed to lead in the direction of the second checkpoint. Captain Takashi decided to follow it, hoping it would save them time. By early afternoon, the team encountered more signs of recent human activity: a makeshift campfire, discarded clothing, and footprints leading deeper into the jungle. Corporal Ananda examined the items closely. "These look fresh," he said. "Whoever was here, they didn't leave long ago." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. Captain Takashi signaled for the team to move cautiously, their senses on high alert. As the sun began to set, the team reached an old, abandoned village. The buildings were in ruins, overgrown with vines and foliage. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. "This place gives me the creeps," Sergeant Lee Wei muttered, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Captain Takashi ordered the team to search the area for any signs of recent activity. As they explored the village, Corporal Ananda found an old journal hidden among the ruins. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the writing was still legible. "It's a journal from someone who lived here," Ananda said, showing the journal to Takashi. The entries detailed the life of the villagers, their struggles, and the eventual abandonment of the village due to a series of mysterious disappearances. The last entry was a chilling account of strange shadows and whispers in the night. "We need to keep moving," Takashi said, his voice tense. "This place is not safe." By dusk, the team set up their camp near the edge of the village, their nerves frayed from the day's discoveries. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. As night fell, the soldiers huddled around the campfire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. The journal's entries weighed heavily on their minds, the sense of dread growing with each passing moment. "Keep your weapons ready," Captain Takashi advised. "We don't know what we're dealing with out here." As midnight approached, the jungle grew eerily silent. The soldiers took turns on watch, their eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. Corporal Ananda was on first watch, his senses heightened by the eerie atmosphere. Suddenly, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the camp. It was a man, dressed in tattered clothes, his face gaunt and hollow. Ananda raised his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The figure did not respond, its eyes fixed on Ananda. Slowly, it began to move closer, its footsteps silent on the forest floor. Ananda's grip tightened on his rifle, his mind racing. "Stay back," he shouted, but the figure continued to advance. Just as Ananda was about to fire, the figure vanished into thin air. He stood there, breathing heavily, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. The other soldiers, alerted by Ananda's shout, gathered around him. "What happened?" Sergeant Lee Wei asked, his eyes wide with concern. Ananda explained the encounter, his voice shaking. Captain Takashi listened intently, his expression grave. "We're dealing with something beyond our understanding," he said. "Stay vigilant. This jungle holds many secrets." As the night wore on, the soldiers remained on high alert, their eyes darting nervously at every sound. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the sense of unease growing with each passing hour. Sergeant Lee Wei took over the watch, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped. The shadows seemed to move, their forms shifting and changing. "We're not alone," he whispered to himself, his grip tightening on his rifle. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. The soldiers huddled together, their nerves frayed and their minds haunted by the ghostly apparition. Day 4, whispers in the dark. The dawn broke over the jungle, But instead of bringing relief, it cast an eerie light on the soldiers' faces. The night's events left them exhausted and uneasy. Captain Takashi gathered his team for a briefing. "We need to reach the third checkpoint today," he said, trying to sound confident. "Stay sharp and stick together." The soldiers packed up their camp quickly, the oppressive atmosphere of the abandoned village pressing on them as they prepared to move out. The team trudged through the dense jungle, the air thick with humidity and tension. Sergeant Li Wei led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. "Keep your formation tight," he instructed. "We can't afford to get separated." As they moved deeper into the jungle, they noticed the wildlife had become eerily silent. No birdsong, no rustling of animals, just the oppressive silence that seemed to grow heavier with each step. By early afternoon, the team came across a narrow, overgrown trail that diverged from their planned route. The trail seemed ancient, with stone markers barely visible under the thick vines and foliage. "This isn't on the map," Corporal Ananda noted, examining the markers. "It looks like it hasn't been used in decades." Captain Takashi decided to follow the trail, hoping it might lead to the third checkpoint. As they proceeded, the jungle seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. The trail led them to a clearing where they found an ancient stone structure, half buried in the earth. It looked like an old shrine, covered in moss and vines. The air around the shrine was cold, a stark contrast to the humid jungle. "This is odd," Sergeant Li Wei said, his voice echoing in the silence. "I've never seen anything like this out here." The soldiers explored the area, their movements cautious. Corporal Ananda found a stone tablet with inscriptions, though he couldn't read them. Captain Takashi felt a growing sense of unease. "Let's not linger here," he said. "We need to keep moving." As dusk approached, the team set up camp near the ancient shrine, their nerves frayed from the day's discoveries. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to intensify, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. "Keep your weapons ready," Captain Takashi advised. "We don't know what's out here." The soldiers huddled around the campfire, their eyes darting nervously at every sound. The oppressive silence of the jungle seemed to weigh heavily on them, the sense of dread growing with each passing moment. As night fell, the jungle came alive with whispers. The soldiers could hear them all around, faint, indistinct voices carried on the wind. Corporal Ananda was on first watch, his senses heightened by the eerie atmosphere. "Can you hear that?" he whispered to Sergeant Li Wei. Li Wei nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "It's like they're all around us," he replied. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The soldiers huddled closer to the fire, their hands gripping their weapons tightly. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the camp, extinguishing the fire. "Stay calm," Captain Takashi ordered, though his voice betrayed his own fear. "Get the fire going again." As the soldiers scrambled to relight the fire, the whispers seemed to close in on them. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision, their forms indistinct and unsettling. As midnight approached, the jungle grew eerily silent once more. The soldiers took turns on watch, their eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. Captain Takashi was on watch when he saw a figure standing near the shrine. It was the same gaunt, hollow-eyed figure from the previous night. The apparition seemed to be watching them, its presence unsettling. Takashi raised his rifle, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" he demanded, but the figure remained silent, its eyes fixed on him. Suddenly, the figure raised its hand and pointed towards the jungle. Takashi felt a chill run down his spine as he followed its gaze. In the distance, he saw more figures, shadowy forms moving through the trees. "Wake up," he shouted, alerting the others. "We're not alone." The soldiers sprang to their feet, their weapons at the ready. The shadowy figures seemed to close in on them, their movements slow and deliberate. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. "Stay together," Sergeant Li Wei shouted, his voice barely audible over the din. "Don't let them separate us." As the night wore on, the soldiers found themselves surrounded by the shadowy figures. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to crush them, the whispers growing louder and more menacing. Captain Takashi struggled to keep his team focused. "We need to move," he ordered. "We can't stay here." As they prepared to leave, one of the shadowy figures lunged at Corporal Ananda. He fired his rifle, but the figure vanished before the bullet could hit. The other soldiers fired into the darkness, but their bullets seemed to have no effect. "It's like they're not even real," Ananda said, his voice shaking. The team retreated, their movements frantic. The shadowy figures followed, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the darkness becoming almost suffocating. Day 5. The Forest of Lost Souls. As dawn broke, the soldiers were still on edge from the previous night's encounter. They had managed to evade the shadowy figures, but the experience left them shaken and exhausted. Captain Takashi called for a quick meeting. "We can't let fear control us," he said firmly. "We need to reach the 3rd checkpoint today and secure it. Stay focused and stay together." The soldiers nodded, their faces pale but determined. They packed up their camp quickly and resumed their journey, leaving the Eerie shrine behind. The jungle felt more oppressive than ever. The air was thick with humidity, and an unnatural silence hung over the forest. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the soldiers noticed the trees seemed to be whispering. It was a faint, almost inaudible sound, but it grew louder with each step they took. "Do you hear that?" Corporal Ananda asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like the trees are talking," Sergeant Lee Wei replied, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Captain Takashi motioned for the team to keep moving. "Ignore it," he said. "Focus on the mission." By early afternoon, the team came across a hidden path that seemed to lead deeper into the jungle. The path was barely visible, overgrown with thick vegetation, but it appeared to be a shortcut to the 3rd checkpoint. "We need to be careful," Takashi said, his eyes narrowing. "This path looks like it hasn't been used in years." The soldiers proceeded cautiously, their senses heightened. As they walked, the whispers grew louder, filling the air with an eerie, almost hypnotic hum. The hidden path led the team to an abandoned campsite. The remains of old tents and equipment were scattered around, overgrown with vines and foliage. It was clear that whoever had been there had left in a hurry. "This must have been another patrol," Li Wei said, examining the remnants. "But why did they leave so suddenly?" Ananda found a weathered journal among the debris. The entries detailed the experiences of the previous patrol, their encounters with strange phenomena, and their growing fear. The last entry was a frantic scrawl, warning of unseen entities and urging anyone who found the journal to leave immediately. "This doesn't look good," Ananda said, showing the journal to Takashi. "We can't let this scare us," Takashi replied, though his voice betrayed his own unease. "We need to reach the 3rd checkpoint before nightfall." As dusk approached, the team set up camp near the abandoned site. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to weigh heavily on them, the whispers growing louder and more insistent. "Stay vigilant," Takashi advised. "We don't know what we're dealing with." The soldiers huddled around a small fire, their eyes darting nervously at every sound. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. As night fell, the jungle grew eerily silent. The soldiers took turns on watch, their eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. Corporal Ananda was on first watch when he saw the first figure. It was a gaunt, hollow-eyed apparition, similar to the one they had encountered before. The figure stood at the edge of the camp, watching them silently. Ananda's heart pounded in his chest as he raised his rifle. "They're back," he whispered, alerting the others. The soldiers sprang to their feet, their weapons at the ready. The apparition remained still, its eyes fixed on them. Slowly, more figures emerged from the darkness, their forms ghostly and indistinct. "What do they want?" Li Wei asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Takashi replied, "but we can't let them scare us." As midnight approached, the apparitions grew bolder, moving closer to the camp. The whispers became voices, distinct and chilling. "Leave this place," One of the voices said, "You don't belong here." The soldiers felt a cold dread wash over them. The apparitions seemed to be the spirits of those who had died in the jungle, their souls trapped and unable to find peace. "We need to leave," Ananda said, his voice shaking. "We can't stay here." "Not yet," Takashi replied, though he knew their situation was dire. "We need to hold out until dawn." As the night wore on, the apparitions grew more aggressive. They moved closer, their ghostly forms almost tangible. The soldiers fired their rifles, but the bullets seemed to have no effect. "It's like they're not even real," Li Wei said, his voice filled with fear. The team huddled together, their backs to the fire. The apparitions surrounded them, their voices growing louder and more menacing. "Leave this place," the voices repeated, "or face the same fate." Takashi knew they couldn't stay there much longer. "We need to make a break for it," he said, his voice firm. "On my signal, we run." The soldiers nodded, their faces pale but determined. Takashi took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "Now!" he shouted, and the team sprang into action, running through the darkness with the apparitions close behind. Day 6, the Relentless Pursuit. The team continued to run through the dense jungle, the apparitions close on their heels. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to press in around them, making every step feel like a struggle. "We need to keep moving," Captain Takashi urged, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We can't let them catch us." As the first light of dawn began to break, the apparitions started to fade, their forms becoming less distinct. The soldiers finally slowed to a halt, gasping for breath. "Are they gone?" Corporal Ananda asked, his voice trembling. "For now," Sergeant Li Wei replied, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "But we need to stay vigilant." The soldiers found a small clearing and took a moment to regroup. They were exhausted, both physically and mentally. Captain Takashi called for a brief rest. "We need to get our bearings," he said, pulling out his map. "The third checkpoint should be just ahead. If we can reach it, we might find some answers." They quickly ate a small breakfast and rehydrated, their nerves still frayed from the night before. The jungle around them seemed eerily silent, as if holding its breath. By early afternoon, the team reached the third checkpoint. It was a small, dilapidated outpost that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The structures were overgrown with vines and moss, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. "This place gives me the creeps," Ananda muttered, glancing around nervously. "Stay focused," Takashi said, his eyes narrowing. "We need to search the area and see if we can find any clues about what happened here." The soldiers spread out, their movements cautious. In one of the buildings, Li Wei found a set of old documents detailing the experiences of previous patrols. The report spoke of strange occurrences and disappearances, similar to what they had been experiencing. "It looks like we're not the first ones to encounter these things," Li Wei said, showing the documents to Takashi. "We need to be careful," Takashi replied. "There might be something here that can help us understand what's happening." While exploring the outpost, Ananda stumbled upon a hidden trapdoor beneath the floorboards of one of the buildings. He called the others over, and they cautiously opened it, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the earth. "What do you think is down there?" Ananda asked, peering into the darkness. "Only one way to find out," Takashi replied, grabbing a flashlight. "Stay close and watch each other's backs." The soldiers descended the staircase, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air grew colder and more oppressive the deeper they went. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a small chamber, filled with ancient artifacts and strange symbols carved into the walls. "What is this place?" Li Wei whispered, his voice echoing in the confined space. "It looks like some kind of shrine," Takashi said, examining the symbols. "Maybe it has something to do with the apparitions we've been seeing." As they explored the chamber, they found a set of old scrolls, written in a language none of them could read. Among the artifacts was a small, intricately carved amulet. Takashi felt a strange pull towards it and carefully picked it up. "This might be important," he said, slipping the amulet into his pocket. "Let's get back to the surface and figure out our next move." As the sun began to set, the soldiers made their way back to the surface. The jungle seemed even more oppressive in the fading light, and an uneasy silence hung over the outpost. "We should set up camp here," Takashi said. "It's defensible, and we need to rest." The soldiers set up a perimeter and built a small fire, their eyes constantly scanning the darkness. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to grow heavier as night fell, and the whispering voices began to return. "Stay alert," Takashi warned. "They're coming." Just as he spoke, shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, surrounding the camp. The soldiers raised their weapons, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Hold your ground," Li Wei shouted, firing into the darkness. "Don't let them get close." As the battle raged on, Takashi felt the amulet in his pocket grow warm. An idea formed in his mind, and he pulled it out, holding it up to the apparitions. The shadowy figures hesitated, their forms flickering. "It's working," Ananda shouted. "Keep it up." Takashi stepped forward, the amulet glowing brighter. The apparitions seemed to recoil from its light, their forms becoming more indistinct. "We need to find out more about this amulet," Takashi said, his voice strained. "It might be the key to stopping them." As the amulet's light grew brighter, the apparitions began to retreat, disappearing into the darkness. The soldiers stood their ground, their breath coming in ragged gasps. "We made it through another night," Li Wei said, his voice filled with relief. "But we need answers." Day 7. The Veil of Darkness. As dawn broke, the soldiers felt a sense of cautious relief. The apparitions had retreated, seemingly repelled by the amulet. Captain Takashi held the relic in his hand, its surface cool now, but still emanating a faint glow. "This amulet might be our only hope," Takashi said, looking at his comrades. "We need to find out more about it." "The documents we found might have some clues," Sergeant Li Wei suggested. "Let's study them while we have some daylight." They gathered around the old documents, carefully unfolding the fragile papers. Although the language was foreign, some symbols resembled those on the amulet. "These look like protective symbols," Corporal Ananda observed. "Maybe this amulet is meant to keep the spirits at bay." With renewed determination, the team packed up and prepared to move towards the fourth checkpoint. They knew the journey would only get more treacherous as they ventured deeper into the jungle. "Stay close and keep your eyes open," Takashi instructed. "We don't know what else we might encounter." As they moved through the thick underbrush, the jungle seemed to watch them. The oppressive silence was occasionally broken by distant, unidentifiable sounds. By early afternoon, they stumbled upon an enormous tree that stood out from the rest of the jungle. Its bark was marked with the same symbols as the amulet. "This tree looks like it might be significant," Li Wei said, examining the carvings. Takashi approached the tree and held the amulet against the symbols. As he did, the amulet began to glow brighter, and a faint hum resonated from the tree. "I think this tree is connected to the amulet," Takashi said. "Maybe it's a marker of some sort." As they continued to study the tree, Ananda found a hidden compartment within its roots. Inside was a small, weathered book, filled with notes and drawings. "This might help us understand more," Ananda said, carefully opening the book. They found a clearing and sat down to study the book. The notes were written in the same ancient script, but some drawings depicted rituals and the use of the amulet to ward off spirits. "It looks like the amulet was used in rituals to protect against dark forces," Li Wei said, tracing the drawings with his finger. "Maybe it can help us find a way out of this jungle." As they pored over the book, the jungle around them seemed to grow darker, even though the sun was still up. The oppressive atmosphere returned, and the whispering voices began to grow louder. "We need to keep moving," Takashi said, closing the book. "Let's try to reach the fourth checkpoint before nightfall." As dusk approached, the team reached the area marked as the fourth checkpoint. It was an old, abandoned village, with crumbling huts and overgrown pathways. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and an eerie silence hung over the place. "This place feels wrong," Ananda said, shivering, like something terrible happened here. They set up camp cautiously, their nerves on edge. The village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. As night fell, the whispering voices grew louder, echoing through the abandoned village. The soldiers huddled around their campfire, the amulet glowing faintly in Takashi's hand. "Stay close," Takashi said, his eyes scanning the darkness. "The spirits will be more aggressive tonight." The apparitions appeared again, their forms more distinct and menacing. They moved through the village, their hollow eyes fixed on the soldiers. "They're getting closer," Li Wei said, gripping his rifle tightly. Takashi held up the amulet, its light growing brighter. The apparitions hesitated, their forms flickering, but they didn't retreat this time. "It's not working as well," Ananda said, his voice filled with fear. As the apparitions closed in, Takashi remembered the book they had found. He quickly flipped through the pages, finding a drawing of a ritual using the amulet. "We need to perform the ritual," he said, his voice urgent. "It's our only chance." Following the instructions in the book, they formed a circle around the amulet, chanting the ancient words written in the book. The amulet's light grew stronger, casting a protective barrier around them. The apparitions screamed in rage, their forms distorting as they tried to break through the barrier. The soldiers continued chanting, their voices growing stronger as the amulet's light reached its peak. "It's working," Ananda shouted. "Keep going." The apparitions began to fade, their screams echoing into the night. The protective barrier held, and finally, the spirits were driven back into the darkness. "We did it," Li Wei said, collapsing to the ground in exhaustion. Day 8. The Awakening Shadows. The dawn brought a tentative peace to the abandoned village. The soldiers, though exhausted, were relieved that their ritual had kept the apparitions at bay through the night. They gathered their gear, ready to move out as soon as possible. "We can't stay here any longer," Captain Takashi said. "The spirits will come back. We need to reach the next checkpoint before nightfall." "Agreed," Sergeant Li Wei replied. "Let's move quickly. We don't know what else might be waiting for us." They packed their supplies and left the Eerie village behind, hoping the amulet would continue to protect them. As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the air grew thicker, and the oppressive atmosphere returned. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the whispering voices were never far away. "It's like the jungle itself is alive," Corporal Ananda remarked, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. "Watching us, stay alert," Takashi reminded them. "We can't afford to let our guard down." They moved cautiously, their senses heightened by the constant feeling of being watched. The amulet in Takashi's pocket pulsed with a faint warmth, a reminder of the protection it offered. By early afternoon, the team reached a fork in the path. One trail was marked on their map, leading to the next checkpoint. The other was overgrown and unmarked, but something about it seemed to call to them. "The map says we should go left," Li Wei said, pointing to the marked trail. "But that other path ... it feels like it's important." Takashi held the amulet, feeling its warmth intensify as he looked at the unmarked trail. "We should follow the amulet's guidance," he said. "It might lead us to something that can help us understand what's happening." Reluctantly, they took the overgrown path, pushing through the dense vegetation. The jungle seemed to close in even tighter around them, the whispering voices growing louder. As they continued along the unmarked path, the trees began to thin out, revealing a clearing ahead. The ground was scorched and barren, a stark contrast to the lush jungle around it. "This place feels wrong," Ananda said, shivering, like it's cursed. They cautiously entered the clearing, the air thick with an oppressive energy. In the center stood a stone altar, covered in strange symbols and dried blood. "This must be some kind of ritual site," Li Wei said, examining the altar. "Maybe this is where the spirits are coming from." Takashi held the amulet up to the altar, its glow intensifying. The symbols on the stone seemed to respond, pulsing with a dark energy. "We need to perform another ritual," Takashi said, opening the book they had found. This might be the source of the spirit's power. As dusk approached, the soldiers prepared to perform the ritual described in the book. They gathered around the altar, forming a circle and chanting the ancient words. The amulet's light grew brighter, casting a protective barrier around them. The air grew colder, and the whispering voices turned into anguished wails. "It's working," Ananda said, his voice trembling, "but we need to keep going." The ground beneath the altar began to tremble, and dark shadows emerged, writhing and twisting in the air. The soldiers continued chanting, their voices growing stronger as the amulet's light reached its peak. "Hold the circle," Takashi shouted. "We can't let them break through." As the ritual reached its climax, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was taller and more menacing than the other apparitions, its eyes burning with an intense, malevolent light. "This must be their leader," Li Wei said, raising his weapon. "We need to destroy it." The figure moved towards them, its form flickering as it passed through the barrier. The soldiers fired at it, but their bullets seemed to have no effect. "The amulet," Takashi shouted, holding it up. "Use its power." Ananda grabbed the amulet, its light burning brighter than ever. He stepped forward, facing the shadowy figure head-on. "Back to where you came from," he shouted, thrusting the amulet towards the apparition. The figure let out a deafening scream, its form twisting and contorting as the amulet's light engulfed it. The other shadows began to retreat, their wails echoing through the night. "We did it," Takashi said, his voice filled with relief. "But we need to keep moving. There might be more of them." Day 9. The Unseen Enemy. The soldiers woke up to a heavy fog rolling through the clearing. The previous night's confrontation with the shadowy figure had left them exhausted, but they knew they had to press on. "We're close to the next checkpoint," Captain Takashi said, looking at his map. "We need to reach it before nightfall. Let's hope we don't encounter any more surprises," Sergeant Li Wei replied, trying to shake off the lingering fear from the night before. They packed their gear, the amulet now safely wrapped in cloth to avoid further exposure to the dark forces. The soldiers resumed their journey along a narrow trail that wound through thick foliage. The fog persisted, casting an eerie pall over the landscape. Every step seemed to echo in the dense mist. "This fog is making it hard to see," Corporal Ananda said, squinting into the gloom. "Stay close and keep your weapons ready." The path grew increasingly treacherous, with hidden roots and uneven ground threatening their progress. The oppressive silence was occasionally broken by distant, unsettling sounds that they couldn't quite identify. By early afternoon, they came upon an old wooden bridge spanning a narrow ravine. The bridge looked weathered and unstable, its boards creaking ominously. "We need to cross," Takashi said, surveying the rickety structure. "But we need to be careful." They began to cross one at a time, moving cautiously. The fog swirled around them, making it difficult to see where the ravine ended. The bridge swayed with each step, adding to their anxiety. "Watch your step," Li Wei called out. "We don't want any accidents." Halfway across, Ananda felt a chill run down his spine as he noticed strange symbols carved into the bridge's supports. "These look like the same symbols from the altar," he said, pointing them out. Takashi nodded. "We need to hurry. Something about this place doesn't feel right." On the other side of the bridge, the soldiers found a small, abandoned cabin nestled among the trees. The fog had lifted slightly, and the cabin's appearance was a welcome sight. "Let's check it out," Takashi said. "We might find some supplies or information." They cautiously entered the cabin, finding it dusty and neglected but intact. Inside, they discovered old maps and a journal lying on a table. "This journal might have some useful information," Li Wei said, flipping through the pages. "It looks like it was written by someone who knew about the spirits." The journal contained notes about the area's history, including references to ancient rituals and warnings about the restless spirits that haunted the Borderlands. This confirms what we've been experiencing, Takashi said. We need to use this information to prepare for the next checkpoint. As night fell, the fog returned, thicker than before. The soldiers set up camp in the cabin, but the oppressive atmosphere made it hard to relax. The sounds of the forest seemed louder, and the whispers returned, more intense than ever. The fog is making it hard to see anything, Ananda said, nervously looking out the cabin's windows. It's like the forest is closing in on us. The journal had mentioned that the fog was a sign of the spirit's approach. The soldiers huddled around the fire, trying to stay alert. In the dead of night, the fog thickened, and the temperature dropped. The soldiers heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the cabin. Their breath came in visible puffs as they listened intently. Someone or something is out there, Takashi whispered, gripping his weapon. Get ready. The cabin door creaked open, and the soldiers prepared for the worst. The fog swirled around them, and dark shapes began to form outside the windows. Stay inside and don't make any noise, Li Wei instructed, his voice steady despite the fear. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was another apparition, but this one seemed more solid, more intent. Its eyes glowed with a menacing light, and it moved with purpose. It's one of the spirits from the village, Ananda said, recognizing the familiar form. We need to drive it away. Takashi grabbed the amulet, holding it up as the figure advanced. The amulet's light flared, but the spirit seemed resistant. It's stronger than the others, Takashi said, his voice tense. We need to find a way to banish it for good. The spirit began to wail, its form flickering as it tried to break through the cabin's defenses. The soldiers fought to keep the protective barrier intact, their voices raised in a desperate chant. Keep the circle, Takashi shouted. We have to hold out until dawn. The amulet's light grew brighter, casting a powerful glow that pushed back the spirit. The apparition screamed in rage, its form distorting as the light forced it to retreat. It's working, Ananda shouted. We can't let up now. The spirit finally dissipated, its wails fading into the night. The fog began to lift, and the oppressive atmosphere lightened. We survived the night, Li Wei said, his voice trembling with relief. But we still have one more checkpoint to reach. Day 10, the final reckoning. As dawn broke, the fog had finally cleared, revealing the dense jungle path ahead. The soldiers were weary but determined, knowing that their final checkpoint was within reach. We've made it this far, Captain Takashi said, checking his map. Just a few more hours, and we'll reach the final border post. Let's hope we don't run into any more trouble, Sergeant Li Wei replied. But I have a feeling the worst is yet to come. They gathered their remaining supplies and started the final leg of their journey. The air was thick with anticipation and lingering fear from the night before. By mid-morning, the soldiers arrived at the final checkpoint, a small, isolated outpost surrounded by tall, ancient trees. The outpost was in disrepair, its wooden walls weathered and worn. This place looks like it hasn't been used in years, Corporal Ananda observed. We should check it out and secure the area. They carefully entered the outpost, finding old supplies and discarded equipment. The atmosphere was heavy, and the silence was almost oppressive. This place feels like it's holding its breath, Takashi said, his eyes scanning the surroundings. We need to be on high alert. As they explored the outpost, Ananda found a hidden room beneath the floorboards. Inside were old documents, maps, and a strange, ornate box. Look at this, Ananda said, opening the box. Inside was an ancient artifact, covered in strange symbols. This must be connected to the spirits, Li Wei said. Examining the artifact, we need to understand what it does. The documents revealed that the outpost had been abandoned because of the restless spirits that haunted the area. The artifact was said to have the power to bind the spirits, but it required a specific ritual to activate. We need to perform the ritual, Takashi said, reading the instructions. It's our only chance to put an end to this. As evening approached, The soldiers set up the ritual site in the outpost. They follow the instructions carefully, placing the artifact in the center and arranging the candles and symbols around it. "This is it," Takashi said. "We need to do this perfectly or risk unleashing more spirits." They began the ritual, chanting the ancient words as described in the documents. The artifact started to glow, and the air grew colder. "It's working," Ananda said, his breath visible in the frigid air. But it's not over yet. As the sun set, the temperature dropped sharply. The outpost was bathed in an eerie twilight, and the whispers of the spirits grew louder. "They're coming," Li Wei said, his eyes wide with fear. "We need to finish the ritual quickly." The spirits began to appear, their forms writhing and twisting in the dim light. They moved toward the ritual site, their eyes burning with malevolent intent. "Keep chanting," Takashi shouted, his voice straining. "We can't let them disrupt the ritual." The spirits swirled around the outpost, their wails filling the air. The artifact's glow intensified, pushing back the apparitions, but the spirits seemed determined to break through. The ritual reached its climax, and a powerful wind howled through the outpost. The spirits became more aggressive, their forms coalescing into a massive, shadowy figure. "It's the leader of the spirits," Ananda shouted. "We need to drive it away." Takashi raised the artifact, its light piercing through the darkness. The shadowy figure roared, its form flickering as the artifact's power fought against it. "Hold your ground," Li Wei commanded, his voice unwavering. "We're almost there." The battle with the shadowy figure was intense, the soldiers pushing through their exhaustion and fear. The artifact's light blazed brighter, and with a final, powerful chant, the figure let out a deafening scream and vanished. As the last echoes of the spirit's wail faded, the outpost fell silent. The temperature began to rise, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. "It's over," Takashi said, breathing heavily. "We've done it, but at what cost?" Li Wei asked, looking around at the damaged outpost. "We've put an end to the haunting," Ananda said. "But we need to report this and ensure that no one else has to face what we've seen." As the first light of dawn touched the jungle, the soldiers prepared to return. They had survived the ordeal, but the experience had left its mark on them. "Let's head back," Takashi said. "We've completed our mission, but we need to get out of here." They made their way back through the jungle, their steps lighter, but their minds heavy with the memories of the past 10 days. "We'll tell our story," Li Wei said, "and make sure that what happened here is never forgotten." As they emerged from the jungle and back to safety, they knew that their ordeal was over, but the shadows of the Borderlands would linger in their memories forever. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Mystical Tales, so you won't miss out on more eerie and thrilling tales in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.